The GB in GB News stands for Great Britain, allegedly. But you'd be forgiven for having some doubts after this monologue from host Ben Leo. It came just hours after Donald Trump threatened to slap a 10% tariff on British exports to the United States, rising to a whopping 25% in a few months' time. This was Ben Leo's angle on that threat of massive economic damage to the UK economy.
This deal, this tariff, is a massive slapdown for the globalists from President Trump just 24 hours, and I don't think it's a coincidence, 24 hours after Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, probably the biggest globalist in the world, the former Bank of England governor, who went to China, cozied up to President Xi and hailed China as a more reliable partner than the United States. And also, by the way, muttering absolute nonsense about a new world order with Canada and China leading the way. So you've got the new world order stuff, you've got Mark Carney cozying up to the commies in China. Commies are going to commie, eh? And then 24 hours later, President Trump says, do you know what? I'm not having this. You've got the liabilities in Europe sending 1 or 2 troops to Greenland for reasons, as he describes, unknown. You've got Mark Carney going to China to cozy up to the commies there. I'm going to slap you guys with a 10% tariff. I've been long of the argument, Alex, listeners and viewers, that President Trump, for some of his faults and his bluster, and he's not perfect, so I'm not saying that, but to me it seems like he is the only person in the West at the moment trying to save the West from themselves.
So GB News, right? The whole point is it's supposed to be patriotic news, standing up for real Britons, right? And we always hear as well that they're really in favour of democracy. Like the argument for Brexit was to say we shouldn't have outside forces intervening in our politics. It should be the will of the electorate that gets its way. Now we've got a democratically elected Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and actually the leader of the opposition as well is taking a similar position on this, as is Nigel Farage, actually. They're all speaking out against these tariffs. And now this GB News host is going on TV and saying, basically, I welcome this economic war against my people because it suits my political agenda. So he's saying if Donald Trump can come over here and damage Britain so much that people decide to go for a shift to the right to suck up to Donald Trump, that's brilliant. That doesn't seem very patriotic to me. That seems opportunistic. And it seems, I don't normally say this word on the show, but traitorous. It seems kind of like something a traitor would say. You saw Leo there parroting Trump, where he talked about European liabilities, sending troops to Greenland for, quote, reasons unknown. Of course, it's not really unknown. The reasons are well known, especially to Donald Trump. So he's repeatedly complained that the island is protected by, quote, 2 dog sleds, claiming that he needs the territory because NATO isn't doing enough to protect it. Now, according to the Danish Ministry of Defence, the troop movements there were an attempt to rectify that, to show that the Europeans can defend Greenland. The ministry posted this announcement last Wednesday. So this is the Danish Ministry of Defence. From today, there will be an expanded military presence in and around Greenland in close cooperation with NATO allies. The purpose is to train the ability to operate under the unique Arctic conditions and to strengthen the alliance's footprint in the Arctic, benefiting both European and transatlantic security. So I suppose actually what the Danes thought they were doing is both showing that, there are European forces there who the subtle messages could defend it from the United States, but they're also saying we're actually doing what you asked from us, Donald Trump, because you wanted us to defend Greenland, and so now we're sending over troops. Obviously, Donald Trump's response is to slap these tariffs on European countries, including ourselves, which Ben Leo, as you saw, very much welcomes. Let's see the rest of his take.
You've got the West generally not taking notice of warnings from the United States. There was a flurry of diplomatic cables which went out to European embassies, including the UK, some weeks ago about the future of Western civilization, warning that it could be under threat if European nations don't sort themselves out. Well, this is just the latest chapter of that. President Trump taking steps to not only secure America's future, but indeed at the same time the West as well. And at the moment, it only seems to be the Trump administration which understands what they're trying to do. Europe, some people in Britain even, not catching up to what's going on here.
Europe not catching up. So we are not quickly enough realizing that there is this external actor who is trying to bully us into changing our stance, even though we've all got democratically elected leaders. That's not good enough. What we need is an outsider to impose economic pain in order to coerce us into having politics closer to Ben Leo's. As I say, somewhat traitorous. It's also not clear that Ben Leo has caught the public mood. These were the scenes as US singer Vanessa Williams sang the Star-Spangled Banner at an NBA game in London last night. Ash, do you think Trump is becoming a liability to the right? I mean, across Europe, because if you identify your politics with a guy who is now very openly attacking your own country, it doesn't look good.
I mean, Michael, the first thing I'd say is that I think that you were really unfair on Ben Leo, the presenter for GB News there, because I think he's one of the country's most talented broadcasters, because who else would be able to deliver a monologue to camera, speaking so eloquently and clearly whilst having their tongue lodged in Donald Trump's instep? Really, really impressive work. I mean, as for whether or not this is a crisis or a liability for the European right, they've got a decision to make. Will they continue to outsource their political imagination, worldview, and talking points to right-wing American podcasters? Or will they uphold some pretty core tenets of their own political philosophy, for instance, national sovereignty? Now, I actually think that the talking points part might win out. And the reason why is this. I think many of these individuals are aping right-wing podcasters, the way in which they deliver their points and also the points that they make, because they've clearly been incredibly successful when it comes to breaking through on social media, cultivating followings on new media rather than, legacy outlets that have been around for a while. They've been really effective at shifting what you might call the Overton window of respectable opinion. And because Britain is seemingly incapable of coming up with a cultural mainstay of its own, I don't know, since the 1970s or 1980s. All these right-wingers are just impersonating people that they see on American YouTube. And so I think that because the incentives align in that sort of direction and not in the direction of actually thinking seriously about what they believe in politically, this is going to be something that they continue to do. Now, there is, I think, the thing that you're talking about, which is that does create a distance and a gap between these kinds of right-wing talking heads and the people who they claim to be speaking on behalf of, which is the sort of, you could say the median right-wing voter in the UK. Now, there's obvious distinctions between myself and the median right-wing UK voter, but one of the few things we probably have in common is a disdain for American exceptionalism, arrogance, and overstepping. I think that you could speak to your average reform voter, and while they might not disapprove of Donald Trump's policies domestically, the idea that he'd want to go around telling our government, our people, what to do and what to think, that would be something that they object to, because national sovereignty is still something which is taken seriously by most people. So I agree that there is an element of liability there. The way in which such, essentially pundits are able to game social media algorithms, I think that it can produce a perception of these points of view as being more popular or widespread than they actually are. But while I think, the likes of Nigel Farage, who has obviously taken a very different view to Ben Leo, but while the likes of Nigel Farage are able to occupy that space of, anti-politics, insurgent populism, the fact that you've got commentators on GB News who aren't singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to Donald Trump, it's not going to matter very much, because people are driven to supporting reform, not necessarily because they're like, yes, I agree with your geopolitical doctrine, but primarily because of their disgust for the status quo. So, bit of a liability, but I don't think enough to actually change the electoral game, not at this stage.
What do you think they're thinking, though? Because, I mean, it's a really easy argument to make if you are like a right-winger who likes Donald Trump, but you want to be seen as patriotic because you're a host on a GB News channel, right? And your viewers probably don't want their own country to be sanctioned. You just say, look, I've really defended Donald Trump over the years, and I agree with a lot of his politics, but you absolutely should not be sanctioning our country for fighting for the sovereignty of the people of Greenland. Like, what you're doing is outrageous, and we're a democracy, and we decide where our military goes so long as it's been invited by the country, as it had been in Greenland. Like, the argument of I agree with your politics, but sanctioning my country is completely wrong. It's not rocket science to sort of hold those two things in your head and communicate those two things to a mass audience instead of sort of saying, oh, what do I'm confused. Which way do I go? I'm supposed to be patriotic, but I like Donald Trump. Okay, yeah, sanction my country. It's great.
But you know what I think it is, Michael? It's something that we talked about last week, which is the effect of negative polarization, right? Forms of negative polarization, negative identification, where you stake out your position based on who you want to disaffiliate from, who you want to create distance from. So I think if you're a GB News presenter or you've been recently kicked in the head by a mule, I mean, those two conditions are often difficult to tell apart. You'd probably looking at, okay, are we going to side with, Denmark and the EU? Are we going to side with, libs like Mark Carney? Or are we going to side with, the sort of Chad American right? Okay, we're going to side with the Chad American right. I think that it is a way of thinking which is inherently unpatriotic, because you're outsourcing your worldview essentially to foreign powers who you think of as being more in the political ascendancy than what you've got going on in your own country. And this outsourcing of the political imagination, it's also why you end up with this, frankly laughable attempt to smear London as a sort of, murder-riven hellhole, and denying the evidence in front of their very eyes about the actually existing crime and hospital admission statistics. It's because these are pundits, I'm not going to use the word journalists because they're not, but pundits whose sole job is to see what's trending on, the American bit of X and just repeat it, even if the evidence of their eyes is telling them something completely contrary. I don't think it's a politics that's rooted in patriotism. I think in a way, it's rooted in talking down your country for an audience or an imagined audience of right-wingers who are coded, at least in your head, as being American. In a way, it's very unpatriotic.